His computer. Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Britt Kanawha West Hancock Athletics Podcast. Dan Kroll here, live from the Britt Public Library for episode 86. It is Hobo Days, so I'm back home, and a lot of people are as well. So we figured if we can do a few episodes in person, we might as well. My guest today is Curt Diemer. Curt was a state qualifier for Britt back in 1980, went on to a Hall of Fame coaching career at some other schools and up in Minnesota, and one of the people responsible for helping get the West Hancock Hall of Fame started. Welcome, Curt.
Thank you very much.
You bet. I'm excited for this one, especially it's a lot more fun to do it in person than it is on a Zoom. So before Curt and I start talking, I want to recognize my sponsors. We have 15 of them for tonight's episode, or this afternoon's, I should say. I have Nick Schmidt, Levi Don Trucking, Jay Hiscox of State Farm Insurance, Window World, Swenson's Hardware, the Britt Car Truck Bike and Tractor Night Cruise, Miller and Sons Golf Cars, Ewing Funeral Home and Monument Company, Doug and Kathy Zool, Daniel's Auto Collision in Charles City, Kelly Real Estate, Triple B's Food Trucks, Lifetime Nut Covers, Dave Hewling, and Carlson Drainage. So thanks to those sponsors again for giving them money for the advertising and sponsorship of the podcast, and all that money goes to the Sanger Legacy Fund. We help fund the West Hancock Hall of Fame. We give scholarships to graduating seniors. We support any athletic and activity funds at West Hancock or any other community school outreach programs. If you want to give, you can go to sangerstrong.com, or if you want to sponsor the podcast, you can get a hold of me and we'll talk about that. And speaking of the West Hancock Hall of Fame, that's 2 weeks from tomorrow night, August 25th. The 7 inductees will be honored at halftime at the Garner-Hayfield Ventura game here in Britt. And then after the game at roughly 9:45, we'll have a semi-formal induction ceremony out at the Britt Golf Course. So come out for that. We have food prepared for about 175 people for a free will offering. So if you'd like to get out there and eat, make sure you get out there early. Way back when, 50 episodes ago in episode 36, I talked to Irvin Gomez, who was a senior on the 2021 state championship football team. We had a good time talking about that season a couple years ago. All right, real quick, some sponsors here, and then Curt looks like he's itching and ready to go. So Swenson's Hardware is your local independently family-owned hardware store and has been since 1977. They're in downtown Britt. Check them out at swensons.doitbest.com. Thanks as always to Doug and Kathy Zool for sponsoring the podcast. This coming Wednesday, a week from today, is the next Britt Car Truck Bike and Tractor Night Cruise event in downtown Britt. Thanks to Jared Winger, also the owner of Mojo Productions, for sponsoring the podcast. Give him a call at 515-408-1074. Check him out at brittcarcruise.com. The Showalter family in Window World in Mason City is a proud sponsor of the podcast. Once an Eagle, always an Eagle. Fly high, Coach Sanger and Joey Showalter. The Jay Hiscox State Farm team in Britt is a proud supporter of West Hancock and the Legacy Fund. Give Jerry Lindsay a call at 843-3563. All right, Curt, let's get started here. Introductions like always, just tell everyone who you are, where you are these days, and what's keeping you busy.
I'm Curt Diemer. I was a 1980 high school graduate from Britt High School, and I was a longtime teacher. I taught for 36 years. And I coached for more than that because I'm still coaching after I've retired. And so throughout the course of this time, I predominantly was a wrestling coach as far as a head coach, but also an assistant in junior high. I did both assistant and about 25 years of junior high football. And then 1 year of junior high baseball in Minnesota and 1 year of junior high softball. And last year, for the first time, I coached the junior high girls wrestling team. So some different areas.
Yeah, I did 1 year of junior high volleyball at I-35, and that was an experience. So kudos to those people that jump into those positions, because it's not easy. So, so you're living in the West Liberty area still, I assume?
We live in West Branch, actually. My wife was a teacher, and then she is a retired teacher coach in that district. And so one of us had to drive, and I made the 12-mile drive. And then my oldest daughter teaches in the Iowa City School District as an ESL teacher, and my youngest daughter teaches at Wilton.
Nice. So all down in that area. This isn't on our notes, but I didn't know you guys lived in West Branch. We got to talk to Butch Peterson for a quick second.
There you go.
I loved following the West Branch football program. I thought there was a lot of parallels between West Hancock and West Branch, just the way those programs are run and the success they had.
And Butch has told me that he sees a lot of similarities between their programs.
Yeah.
I think both of them it's a big community event for both schools.
Yep, and he passed away less than a year ago now. How long ago was that?
It was really fast. It was this winter.
Yep.
He's sort of in name was the coach. He still technically was the head coach last year, but his health was failing him. And it really sort of came on quickly. I remember seeing like him on the golf course last year and stuff like that. And unfortunately it was really difficult on him. And they had a great football season there for the last season and got to the semis, I believe.
Yeah. Good guy, good program. Like I said, a lot of similarities between West Hancock and West Branch. So yeah, so you graduated from Britt in 1980. So that means you wrestled for Coach Al DeLeon, 1976-77 season through the 79-80 season. In my research and stuff I did for the book I wrote, didn't see any varsity action from your freshman season. Is that correct? Did you not wrestle varsity that first year, or a little bit, or
just a little? So that year it was kind of, this tells you a little bit about the power that Britt had. But there were 6 or 7 of us at 98 pounds.
Yeah.
And we all, 4 of us ended up going to state out of those 6.
Nice.
And so we had Dwayne Grant and myself and Chris Foy and Kevin Potson. We were all friends. And depending on the week, one of us would beat the other. And eventually Dwayne Grant got the spot and got 6th in state. But I think that all of us got at least 1 or 2 matches in on varsity and that year. So
nice. What'd you learn varsity wrestling for DeLeon coming out of middle school?
Well, I'd known him all the way through as a little kid. My brother had wrestled for him, and I just thought he's like one of the coolest guys to wrestle for. I thought it was just really kind of an honor to be able to wrestle for him.
Yeah, definitely. So then sophomore year, you jumped into that varsity lineup. Did you go up a class? Weight class?
Yeah, I would say if I ever wanted to forget a year in sports, that was my sophomore year. Because I had always had success in like little kids wrestling and junior high wrestling. And my sophomore year, I started the year cutting from like 125 down to 112. And the day the season was done, I remember within like a day or two, I was up to like 134 pounds. And it was like a weight cutting nightmare for me.
Yeah.
And I think it affected my wrestling somewhat. But it was so I didn't probably enjoy it. I didn't wrestle as well as I should have or could have probably, but yeah, so that was, but I did get quite a bit of varsity that year. And and then I think my junior year, I jumped all the way up to 132 pounds. Nice. And the much more comfortable weight class for me.
Yeah, you can live with that. Yeah. But our age anymore, a couple meals and I can gain about 12 pounds. So doesn't take much anymore, but for all the wrong and different reasons. So yeah, so as a sophomore, you placed 3rd in the conference, and then your junior year, you're 4th in the conference and 3rd again as a senior. One thing that was always kind of cool in the research I did for my book and stuff, the North Iowa Conference tournament started in the early 70s. It wasn't always a thing like some people might think. We won the first 4. Osage won, I think, 1 or 2, and then we won another one, and then Osage went on like a almost 20-year run of winning it every year. So you, in your 4 years, you won 1 conference title, and we were runner-up 6, 7, 8 years in a row, whatever it was. All the Osage, of course.
Yeah, and one year I think it got snowed out, if I'm not mistaken. I think
might be.
Maybe my freshman year they didn't have one year there wasn't a conference tournament, I don't think.
Okay.
Or maybe it's only with Osage or something, but there's something really big with Osage that time that didn't happen.
Yeah. I wrote a book about it. I should know. I want to say on the spot here, I think we had it all 4 years you were there.
We won the dual. We did win the dual side of it all 4 years.
Yeah.
That I was there. But the tournament, they beat us in the tournament as a senior.
Yeah. You coached for a lot of years. What's the difference between wrestling like an Osage in a tournament compared to a dual? Why is it that sometimes you win in the dual part, but in the tournament, the other team might get the win?
Well, obviously sometimes in the sport like wrestling, you have kids out of a lineup for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And so that can have a huge effect on both of those. And so to stay healthy all the way through a long season is something that's pretty big. And sometimes, like your big guns can really score a lot of points in a tournament with like fall points and stuff like that. So it's maybe geared a little bit more towards that
And like you and Osage might have had the top two guys in a weight class, but to get to that match depends on who you're wrestling from what school and how many points they rack up, and different than just a one-on-one. So yeah, I noticed that a lot in the book. We might get beat in a duel, but then beat that team at sectionals, just in a different style and scoring and stuff. So yeah, so in your 4 years, Britt, in dual meets, you guys went 30, 11, and 2. 7-3 your freshman year, 8-3-1 your sophomore year, 7-2-1 your junior year, and then 8-3 your senior year. You guys won the sectional title all 4 years. You won 2 district titles as a team, and the years you didn't win a district title as a team, you were runner-ups. You personally, individually, won a sectional title in 1980 and qualified for state. How about your sophomore and junior year? Do you remember how close you were to state those years?
So in sophomore year, I actually got beat out to wrestle sectionals, and
Okay.
Kevin Potsman got 5th or 6th in state that year. We'd gone back and forth. My junior year, I thought I was wrestling pretty well. I had a guy named Mark Stevens, who was a 3-time state champion in my sectional, plus a guy who ended up getting 3rd for Mason City the following year in our sectionals. And I beat the guy that got 3rd, and I lost in overtime to the guy that became a 3-time state champion. And then in districts, we had a guy who had been to state the year before. And this is my little sour grapes, but I thought I was a real kind of a controversial call that came down to that. And it didn't go my way. And Mark Stevenson from Northwood, Ken said he ended up winning state for his 3rd title. And then that kid that I had ended up pinning his way through state the following year.
Okay.
So I ended up getting 3rd in districts as a junior.
Okay, and then made the state as a senior. So you can almost, I call it the Billy Dahlman effect. Billy Dahlman is one of the most legendary guys in the whole Brit wrestling program. Did not wrestle varsity because there was so much depth in the Brit program. He's a future Hall of Famer, yet when you go back and look at records and stats, you're not going to find any on Billy. So like you're a one-time state qualifier, probably easily could have been 2 or 3, but you guys just had so many guys in your weight classes that were fairly interchangeable per se at the time.
Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, there was a lot of good kids if you in that time period, like Jerry Finch, for example, was an excellent wrestler, and took him to a lot of those guys took him till their senior year to get him to crack the varsity lineup. And we had a lot of really good wrestlers at that time, and it was just deep, especially in the kind of reverse of the current West Hancock team, but our lower and middle weights were just really stacked. And then we struggled to find big kids at that time. And then somewhere in the course of time, it flip-flopped. Maybe about the time that the Kellys and Finches went through.
Yeah, I noticed that in my research for the book. It was like, man, I would love to have seen practice at the lower weights with Billy and Coach DeLeon leading things. Then there's about 18 of you guys all within those first 5-6 weights. That seemed it was just a battle.
Al would have us wear lead vest before sectional and districts. And we have to run the steps of the old grade school. And you could hear Billy Dahlman coming up behind you all the time. He was always working out with us and stuff like that. And he was just, he's an incredibly positive, wonderful guy, but he was in shape, and he was a hard runner, and a lot better runner than I was, that's for sure.
He's still in much better shape than I currently am. I know that. And he's a couple years older than I am. So, So 1980, your senior year, you make it to state. What kind of a feeling was that for you to be like, I didn't really wrestle much as a freshman. I got beat out before sectionals my sophomore year. I was real close my junior year. What's that mean to you to be a state qualifier for Brit?
I would say it was kind of a relief in a way. I'm maybe this became good for me in the coaching area, but I always felt that I was good enough to place pretty high in state. And I think I really wrestled a really dumb match at state. And if your guy didn't make it to the finals back then, you were done. You didn't have a second chance. And but I would say that maybe put a little chip on my shoulder that maybe helped me in coaching because of that, because a lot of those guys, I'd have in my intramural brackets and stuff at UNI, and I'd kind of walk through the intramurals every year at UNI. And it's like, why in the world didn't I do this when I was in high school, sort of thing. And I look back and it's like, that was a really dumb match is what I really think about it. But it was, it was a cool experience to get on with my friends. I guess Chris Foy and Mike Horseman are two of my best friends.
Yep.
And we went down together, and Curt Diemer also went with us that time. And it was, a great experience that way. It's just, personally, I should have done a lot better than what I did. I really have no excuse other than I wrestled a really dumb match.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, lots of people would, be envious of that never made it to state, would love just to have been there. So do you remember who you wrestled and where that kid was from?
I do. And I can remember exactly why I lost, because I've taught that how that shouldn't ever happen to somebody for the last 35, 40 years. But basically I was ahead in the match. And I was on the bottom, and I was actually, Al, all of us were good mat wrestlers after wrestling with Al, and I had a Granby on him, and I had not seen this before, but he kind of figured forward his leg and hopped forward. And so I basically spent the whole second period with my knees facing this way, my arms kind of over the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I wasn't close to being pinned, but I couldn't get myself out of that position. And I gave up 3 back points on that, even though I was just sort of stuck there for a whole period.
Yeah.
And that was what cost me the match, basically. And so I had to teach people how to do that move, and also how to make sure that doesn't ever happen to you.
Do you remember how far that kid made it in the tournament?
He ended up getting beat, and
the next round.
Is that or the semis?
Okay.
But he got beat fairly convincingly in whatever round he went out in. So
do you feel like if you would have gotten past him, you would have had a chance to get as far as he did or farther?
Well, I'm pretty confident, because some of the guys I had beaten, for example, like placed third in 3A and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, I didn't ever lose, even when I went against a state champion by more than usually a couple points.
Yeah.
Unless it was like I got caught twice in my life.
Yeah.
But other than that, I never really got cranked to my back. I was pretty flexible and stuff, so that usually helped. So I knew I was there with those kind of guys. I wasn't,
you
but
had a chance, just as good as any to go
yeah,
pretty far.
I just, looking back, if I would have coached myself, I needed to be more offensive than what I was. I wrestled a little too defensive.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah.
Looking back at
not in our notes, but who was the better wrestler, you or your brother Jim?
it.
Smaller, you were smaller probably than he was, but
Well, I would say this. He ended up being he got third in state, and then he ended up being an All-American at Nyack the second year out. So I would, I'd have to give him credit on that. The last time we wrestled, he graduated from vet schools. The day he graduated out of Iowa State University in vet school, we got in a wrestling match in my sister's apartment at the time. We put a giant hole in the wall. And
from whose body did that?
We're not even really sure to this day, because we were both flying around. It was, we were pretty even. And my dad, who usually liked to watch that, he came out and goes, "You guys are paying for that." He went out, we just quickly got out our billfolds and set out money to pay my sister.
Finish the match.
So that was our last one. But he used to always say when we were growing up, like, when I'm 80 and you're 74, I'm still gonna be able to beat you, sort of thing. But
well, it's Hobo days. You're in Britt.
Yeah,
I think we need to set this up.
Yeah, maybe
Jim versus Curt over at the vet clinic, and we'll $5 cover fee to get in.
I would tell you that when I was growing, it was kind of a funny story, but Mark Stevenson was my brother's best friend, and we had a wrestling mat in our basement. And so most nights we'd go and do some sort of wrestling. But anyways, Mark Stevenson would come over, and of course I'm 5 or 6 years younger, and they'd have a bet how fast they could pin me. And so one of them would go out there and they'd throw me on my back, and it'd be like, 25 seconds. And then the next one go, and if I was going to lose either way, because if I tried to run from them, then they would torture me. And if I went out there and I lasted longer than that, then they would torture me. Otherwise, I'm still going to get pinned really fast. So they kind of got their thrills off the beating up on their.
Well, I was going to ask, how willing of a participant were you in those?
Not too much sometimes, but I suppose once in a while I ran my mouth, so I probably deserved a few of them.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah. So, and speaking of Mark and Jeff, they're future Hall of Famer Stevenson's. Just that run between the late 60s to about your time, there's just so many state champions and just so many good wrestlers coming through the Britt program. And if I remember right, the Hagens and the Cooks and the Stevensons, did they all live within like a block or so of each other?
Well, so like originally, before my parents built the house that I grew up in, they lived right across the street from Stevenson's, who were right next door to Hagens. So they were all there. And then the Cooks, if you know where the Methodist church is,
Yep.
they lived on the other side of, so when we lived to our house on 4th Street,
Yep.
we had a lot of like sort of baseball games in the church lot over there. And so they were probably like 3 blocks apart at that point,
Yep.
but like sort of a central, there's a lot of central meeting places for all of them.
I mean, you're talking like 13 state championships within blocks of each other in a short amount of time. That's just crazy. So talk about Al DeLeon a little bit. Tomorrow I'm going to record a podcast with Larry Hochhaus at Lois and Al DeLeon's house. Talk about Al, talk about going through his program and what you took away from him to your coaching career.
I told Al, I was glad I got a chance to do this, but I told him his health was starting to decline, that he was the second most important person as far as like who I looked up to next to my dad.
Yeah.
And he, as a coach, both he and Bob Sanger, there was never a question about how much they were willing to put forth to win. I mean, you could have called Al 24/7 and he would have gotten you on the scale to weigh you. He would have done whatever it took to help you be the best. And a lot of people, have told me that like when I teach technique, that it's really easy to learn from me. But I would say that all goes back to Al. And the reason why is Al, if you talk to anybody that's ever wrestled for him, he taught things in numerical sequence. Mm-hmm. So it would be like, if you're going to teach a certain move, you'd say 1, grab the wrist, 2, knees together. He would kind of go through like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then sometimes even put it to like sort of motivational things. Okay. And so when I teach moves, I still find myself doing that, 1, 2, 3. And I'll just start speeding it up like Al did, and then just going over it. And so my teaching technique is similar, and I still do. Al had us do sort of fundamental basic drills every day at the start of practice. And for at least the first week of, even when I'm doing junior high yet today, I go through a lot of those same basic drills that Al showed us at that time. So I would say there was a lot of carryover.
And I know I've heard from other people I've interviewed the why. They were so good at coaching the why. Why are we doing this? It's if a kid understands it's not just a drill to kill 10 minutes in practice. Why are we doing this? That's so big. And those guys, legendary coaches, they had that status where, boy, they tell me to do something, I better do it because they know what they're talking about. But I was with Bob, and then I never wrestled, but they were always, here's the why we're doing this, so that when you're in a situation in a game or in a match, you actually understand, oh, that's why we're doing this. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say, he obviously, he was runner-up in NCAA tournament. Obviously we knew he knew his stuff. He won state championships. So, you're not going to really question him. And plus, he had your back at all times. So everything he's doing for you is for your own benefit. Yeah. And
you had a couple, before we recorded, you had a couple good Al DeLeon story and a good Bob Sanger story. You want to share those now before we move on to your coaching career?
Okay. Well, I have 2 quick ones I said about Al that I said at this tribute, but one of them was my friend Mike Horseman had stolen some donuts from a tray out of the cafeteria, and he had me be the lookout person, and Coach DeLeon was her study hall monitor. And I'm trying to get Mike's attention because Coach DeLeon was walking around the corner to see where Mike had gone. And when he came around the corner, Mike turned around, he goes, Horseman, were you eating donuts? Mike's like, no. He goes, let me see your hands. Horseman had sugar all over his hands. And so we got a 40-minute wrestling detention with him. And probably the more recent one is before Al passed away. This wasn't more than maybe a year before he passed away. He was walking, they were going down the street, and I was over at my brother Jim's house, and he had said, he goes, you know what? It used to take me about 30 seconds to pin you guys. He goes, it might take me a minute now. So that's, pretty good with Al in that regard. And he always was really lighthearted and that kind of stuff. And
then you mentioned Bob Sanger would want to win, but we know on the flip side, he doesn't like to lose. Talk about coaching ping pong a little bit.
Yeah, that's on bad. Bob and I played a lot of ping pong, and what would happen a lot of times is, for the most part, I could beat Bob in ping pong, and when the bell would ring to go to my next class, he wouldn't let me go because he'd want to keep on playing ping pong until he won a game. And so a couple of times, like we're getting like 3 games after this, and he's like, you're fine. I'll get you a pass. And so we're sitting there, and it's like, I had a choice of either try to throw a game or turn around and finish it up. And so we had a lot of kind of things like that. And he loved to play, like, I played him in tennis. I played him in badminton. I played him in ping pong, and he, like any sport, he was up for it. So,
And he was up to win.
he did. Yes.
My question is, you were late for class, but didn't he have another class to teach? Would he be like,
You
kids just be
know,
standing there going, where's?
that's a good
Where is he?
question. And I don't know, but I don't know that. I think he was so laser focused. It's like, I think one time we played like 6 sets of tennis on those on 3rd Street on those
Yeah.
courts one time. And he was just going to keep playing and playing on that but yeah, I think that really, along with being in a competitive household in a competitive neighborhood, when you had coaches like that, and then you grow up in that environment, it just makes you that way.
Yeah.
And so for better or for worse, I was bound to be really competitive.
Yeah, you might be one of the only people, maybe the only person I've ever met and talked to that beat Bob Sanger in ping pong. Because when I was growing up in the early 2000s, there was nobody I knew that came close to beating the guy, even when he was a little bit older than when you were in school. Oh my gosh, he wouldn't show any mercy to anybody. So that made my day right there to hear that. So
We had a lot of games, but I think he would have beaten me in badminton at that time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, anything else about growing up in Britt? Coaches or whatever.
Well, with those 2 guys, I just really, I think it really helped me going into coaching, because I think they oversaw like a K-12 kind of a program. And so I think, I think my dad was a really hard worker and really good with people. And both, there was no questioning the work ethic of either Bob or Al and their commitment to their sport. And so I think I just had a really easy blueprint to know how to coach from those people. And so it was kind of an easy transition for me.
And I know they're not in the notes here, but you mentioned your parents a few times. I don't remember your mom very well, but the vet office was just a couple doors down from my parents' pizza place. Talk about Doc Diemer a little bit, because I remember him pretty well from my childhood.
Well, my dad didn't wrestle, but he loved wrestling. They didn't have it, and he went to Ackley. But he always would say he never lost a match in the Haymal, but it would go till somebody chokes, till you tapped him out choking them. But he wanted us to wrestle, but he liked every sport. I mean, he watched, baseball, golf, wrestling, football. I mean, he just liked a lot of sports. And I wouldn't really say any pressure, but it was just that we were surrounded by it all the time. And talking about a poor loser, I beat him in cribbage one time, or a couple games in a row, and he ripped a deck of cards up while we're sitting there. So he was not a very good loser either at times. And my mom was just nice and easy and sweet, and never had any sort of emotion to her.
Yeah. And when did they pass, you folks?
My dad, I think it's been like 10 years
Has it
or
been
so.
that long?
And my mom is like, this, I think 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. I remember going into the vet clinic for various reasons, or no reason at all. Sometimes I was the kid on Main Street that would just roam around, and I always remember going there and shooting the breeze with him and had a good time.
But, I had to, like, as far as weightlifting, I had to go and catch pigs usually on Saturday morning. It was kind of my job. So when he would vaccinate and castrate them, I would have to grab them.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of places where, I don't want to say the names because they're Brit people, but he would say, you can't catch pigs as fast as this woman can catch pigs out there. And so I'm sitting there trying to throw these pigs over a gate really fast. And he'd purposely go to her before he'd come over to me, so she could keep ahead of me on that one all the time.
Keep me in check.
So it was always, there was a lot of competitions in that regard.
Yeah.
Even fishing, everything we did was sort of competitive.
The way it should be.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna hit a few sponsors here, then we're gonna talk about Curt's coaching career. I have a new sponsor, that's Lifetime Nut Covers. Since 1990, Lifetime Nut Covers has been providing drivers with high quality American-made nut covers and a wide variety of accessories. Call them at 641-565-3566 or check them out at lifetimenutcovers.com. And then Daniels Auto Collision in Charles City. Thanks to Jason Daniels, a 1990 West Hancock grad, for sponsoring the podcast. Give them a call at 641-220-3805 or check them out at danielsautocollision.com. Thanks as always to Kelly Real Estate in downtown Britt, owned by Steve and Deanna Kelly. Give them a call at 843-4102 or check them out online or on Facebook. And then Nick Schmidt, a future podcast guest, is a 2000 West Hancock grad, and he's sponsored almost all of my podcasts. So thanks as always to Nick Schmidt. And then a longtime sponsor as well, Michael Ewing of Ewing Funeral Home and Monument Company. Locations in Britt, Kanawha, Clarion, Belmont, and Dow's. Check them out at ewingfh.com or on Facebook, or give them a call at 843-3839. All right, where did you go to college, and why did you decide to get into coaching?
So I went to UNI, and I went back and forth between whether I was going to be a veterinarian and go to Iowa State, or I was going to be a teacher and go to UNI. And I went to UNI not knowing which of the two routes I was going to go. And at the end of my first semester, I decided I want to be a teacher. And so that's kind of how that happened.
Yeah, and then the coaching part, and that just kind of naturally come with it, or did it?
Yeah, well, and I had some kind of lucky things happen. I went to 1 year summer school so I could get out in 4 years.
Yeah.
And I'm going to a class at the Ed Center at UNI. And of all people, I ran into the Osage wrestling coach, Bill Andrew, and who was our arch rival. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if I could even explain how heated those wrestling meets were between Britt and Osage back in those, like that 1980 time period.
Yeah.
And he like, hey, calls me over there, and we start talking, and he asked me what I was going to do. And I said, oh, I'm going to be a teacher and a coach. And he asked me where I was going to student teach at. And I said, well, probably Clear Lake or Forest City, so I can live at home. And then because that way I have a place to stay. And he goes, well, why wouldn't you student teach at Osage? And I'm like, well, that'd be too far of a drive from Britt to go to Osage. But I knew at the time they had like Mark Schwab and some really good wrestlers. And he goes, I tell you what, he goes, if I find a place for you to stay in Osage, he goes, will you coach here? I'd like you to coach on our staff. And I'm like, kind of, well, okay. And then I don't think I'm going to really hear from him.
Yeah.
And the next day I get a call, and it happened to be my wife's dad was an engineer and had been with White Farms, and White Farms shut down in Charles City. And so he had to take a job for a period of time in Missouri. And my wife was off at college along with her older sister. And then there was 2 younger siblings at home. And they said, well, you can stay in an extra room at this house and just help the younger boy with wrestling and help shovel a little bit. And you could stay there. And when my wife came back from college, that's how I met her. So I can actually say that I lived with her before I ever dated her.
Nice.
And then anyways, it was really fortunate because we got second in state that year. We had 9 guys in the state tournament on that team, and it just reiterated so many things similar to what Coach DeLeon was doing. A lot of similarities in the programs at that time. And so again, it just gave me more background about when the time came for me how I wanted to run a program.
And that first program was Akron Westfield at the age of 22. You sound like you were pretty prepared on the mat, teaching kids skills and stuff. But what did you learn? Because I'm a head coach on a golf program down there, and it's not even remotely close to wrestling or football program. There's a little bit more that goes into being a head coach than just practice and meets.
Yeah.
What did you learn about being a head coach at Akron?
Well, I didn't really set out to be a head coach at 22.
Yeah.
There wasn't. At that time in the early 80s, it was a really difficult time to find teaching jobs. There just weren't very many jobs. And what happened is it was either going to be out of state or this. And the people at Akron Westfield were really, really nice. And I went through the study halls, and I had all of these 9th and 10th grade kids out, and they ended up being pretty good before they were done. But basically the head coach was ready to retire, and he said he can do it 1 more year and then train me, or you can be a head coach right away. And I'm like, what should I do? And my dad goes, oh, be a head coach. And so I did it, and there I went. So without really planning on it, I ended up as a head coach at 22 years of age. and I had no assistant. And yeah, and I lived in a basement apartment and there it was.
You were the man right away. I was a head football coach at like 25 at a school when I started my career. And oh my goodness, it's, I always say people don't realize the time and effort that go into running a program of any kind, let alone one of those major sports. It's tough, especially when you're young, and people are always there to question you and critique you and want to let you know that maybe you're not doing things perfectly. So I've been there, done that to a degree. What kind of success did you guys have at Akron Westfield?
I could fill out a lineup from just recruiting. And I said the entire team was like freshman, sophomore, so we ended up like 6-4.
Nice.
And they didn't have as many dual meets back then.
Yep.
And had a freshman heavyweight make it to state for me, who would eventually become a runner up. And I, like I said, wrestling, we were going to win there. There was no doubt about it. But I was engaged to my wife at the time, and she still had to get a little bit more schooling to get done. And I was a little bit homesick for being more towards eastern Iowa, central Iowa. And so I decided to go, and I took a job then and just north of the border in Grand Meadow, Leroy Ostrander.
Yep.
And
how many years were you at Akron?
I was there 1 year.
Just the 1 year. Okay. And then how far is Grand Meadow, Leroy from Britt?
It was about an hour and 45 minutes. So it's right on the other side of Austin.
Okay. So a little bit closer than Akron, but
yes,
still.
And close to my wife's family in Osage.
Okay. Yep. You had a 2-time state champion and future All-American that went on to Nebraska there. What was his name? And talk about him a little bit.
Chris Nelson and his son Garrett played for Nebraska the last 4 years and got drafted this year. So that was really cool. Nice. And I had Chris had gone to state as a sophomore and didn't win any matches. And he went up to back then it was 185. And he went through that year and he had maybe 2 or 3 close matches as a junior, but won state fairly easy. And then the senior year, he really was an undersized heavyweight, but he just went up to heavyweight. And I think he had 2 kids he didn't pin on the whole season up there. And then he went to Nebraska as a 190 pounder and had some injuries, but he became an All-American for him.
You didn't become a Husker fan, did you?
No.
Okay.
No.
So we can continue the podcast.
But yeah. And that's the first time I really had to deal with recruiting, because there was like 3 coaches in his living room at the time from D1 programs, and they're all wanting his commitment. And he kind of pulled me in the kitchen and says, I'm afraid to hurt their feelings, sort of. But yeah, he did. And
the nature of the business. So.
And he he was great. And then we weren't able to win a conference title, and there it's a district, it's not sectional district, it's a district region. But we won a district title that year, and so we had pretty good success.
Talk about one of your assistants, a guy that was on your staff that literally was sitting in this exact same spot as us about 2 months ago, maybe.
Well, I'd always heard of Dean Hiscox, but I hadn't met him. I knew all the other Hiscox, obviously, that Don Hiscox and John Hiscox farmed for my dad, and Mike Hiscox was a really good friend of mine, his dad, Monty Hiscox. And so I knew all the Hiscox really well, but I had not met Dean before. And my dad had said he's a really nice guy. And I really think that in a way, Dean helped me get that job, because I remember him telling me, I don't know if he remembers this, but he told the administration at the time, he goes, you might have other candidates, but none of them are from Britt, Iowa. And this guy's from Britt, Iowa, he knows how to wrestle. And so anyways, long story short, he helped me get the job, and he was our junior high coach. And it was wonderful because he was also a school custodian. He had the mats washed every day, never had to deal with that, which is if you ever coached wrestling, that's a wonderful thing to have taken off your plate. So they were always clean, and the kids loved him. He was a great recruiter. And so between the 2 of us, we were able to get a lot more kids out, and that really helped the program get going there.
Yeah, I so enjoyed talking to Dean. It was early June or whatever. I was in town here. Oh, such a nice guy. And for his age, he's in his 90s, just all the things he could still remember. And I'm going to plug my last podcast I did with the 1956 wrestling team. A little nervous. People of that age tend to forget things, but man, if you mentioned wrestling from back in the day, they remember everything, just like that podcast I did just the other day. And Dean knew his stuff. He had a bag full of things. That guy was seconds away from the Olympics back in '52. So
and I
pretty
think
crazy.
At long after I left, I think he got some award for Southeastern Minnesota for all the years
Yep.
that he did like the junior high and helped with their youth
Help with
program.
state
And
and a bunch of stuff.
yeah, so he was recognized, which he was very deserving of that. So
Yep.
that was awesome to see.
Yep, good guy. And then for you, a job opened up a few years later in Stewartville, Minnesota. Had some more success there. Another kid that went on to Nebraska to do good things. Why'd you leave Grand Meadow, and talk about Stewartville a little bit?
Well, as a teacher, you might be able to appreciate this, but I was the only social studies teacher at Grand Meadow. And so I had 7 different preps.
Oh yeah.
And that was a brutal teaching schedule. And Stewartville was a school that was about 5 or 6 times larger school. And they had a coach that had retired, and it looked to me like sort of a really good dream opportunity. You could go in and really make some noise in this program. And so he was the athletic director. And so I told him once, I said, if you end up with an opening, and you just let me know, because I knew he was going to retire. And so he called me, and I interviewed there, and I got the job. And we had 2 really good, we were 29-2 the 2 years that I was there. And I ran into a Chad Nelson, no relation to Chris Nelson, and who, I got to be careful how I said, but may have been the best wrestler that I ever coached. He was listed as the 5th best recruit in the United States as a senior. And so I had him his freshman year and a sophomore year. In his sophomore year, he won 14-3 in the state finals as an undefeated sophomore, and he was weighing in about 5 or 6 pounds underweight. And
you go on to win 3.
He went on to win 3. And then one of my kids that I'd had at Grand Meadow, Leroy Osner, was transferring in. Plus, we had almost the whole rest of the squad back. So my issue at the time was we had the district was having all kinds of budget issues, and they forced the band teacher to start moving into social studies, even though he taught for 23 years as a band teacher. And so if you were young, you had a really uncertain future in that school. And so I had hurried up and got my master's degree at Winona State, and what I wanted to be was a guidance counselor. But they had a 2 or 3 year moratorium before they would take any applicants into the counseling program.
Yeah.
So I went and got an administration, not really knowing that I ever wanted to be an administrator, but I just got it done to branch off. And I decided I wanted the security of that, and I was still young enough to move. And so I applied at 2 places, at Emmitsburg and at West Liberty. And Emmitsburg, I would have loved that job as well, but they also had like a head baseball and some other position. They weren't really sure how they're going to fill it, so they said it's going to be a while before we get back to you. Yeah. West Liberty offered me on the spot, but I had like 3 or 4 days to let them know. Yeah. And so I took the job, and I didn't know how long we were going to be there, anything like that. And when we moved down there, my wife got a teaching job in West Branch, and here we are now, like 35 years later, we're still there. But that's how we ended up with both of us having teaching jobs like 10 miles apart. It was a really good setup for us, and Iowa City's a great area to be around. Yeah,
you turned West Liberty, we'll get to that in a minute, into a top-notch program in the state. But anyone that knows wrestling knows Emmitsburg won, I don't know, 10 state championships in wrestling. Did you ever look at that and compare or think about the what ifs, or not really at that point?
Bob Kenny, who's now at Mason City, became their coach, and he was at Esterville, and we used to duel them when he was at Esterville all the time at the Don Bosco duels. So I knew him really well. And then later on, they did end up having a wrestling one, and that's one that Bob Kenny took in when they started winning all those titles. And he's an Osage boy.
Yep.
But I knew Emmitsburg would be an easy place to win at. I didn't know when I first went to West Liberty how good we could make it. I wasn't really sure, and luckily it worked out for us. But it was a little more of an unknown school to me than what Emmitsburg, because I knew all about Emmitsburg.
Yeah, and they got between football and wrestling for sure, a good run of athletics. So you ended up at West Liberty in 1989. What made you get back to Iowa?
I actually always wanted to be in Iowa. I probably, if you would have said when I was coming out of college, I would have liked to be in either North Central or Northeastern Iowa. It just really never worked out that way. There weren't any jobs at the time when I was looking for jobs. And then by that time we got settled when they kind of opened up. So But that's so, and like I said, the Iowa City area was somewhat of a draw for us, and so that's how we ended up down there.
Hawkeye fan?
I am,
Good.
but I grew up actually a Cyclone fan. And then, but I also liked Iowa. And then when I got down there, and well, also when I was in Minnesota, it made me really a bigger Hawkeye fan because they didn't like Iowa very well. And so it sounded like, you know what, I just love crushing to go for every year.
And they're still like that. They're still
Yeah,
jealous.
so anyways, it's every year that game means a little bit more to me when Iowa
Yeah.
plays Minnesota than some of the other games.
Yeah, I know this is a wrestling podcast. My wife and I are excited. We just got Iowa women's basketball season tickets. We're about 2 hours from Iowa City, so
Did you see they're gonna play a game at Kinnick Stadium like they did the wrestling one? It just was announced today.
I hadn't heard
They're
that.
gonna play an outdoor game to try to
Nice.
break the all-time attendance record.
We might have to go if the date works
Yeah.
out for us. Yeah, we decided why not? Let's go for it. We can watch Caitlin Clark play as much as we can, and everybody else. A good team overall. So anyway, back to wrestling. You were at North Liberty or West Liberty, sorry, from 1989 to the year 2000. That's where you really had a lot of your success and became a Hall of Famer. You were one of 3 of the inaugural members into the West Liberty Wrestling Hall of Fame. This is the stat that stood out to me the most, Curt. In conference duels at West Liberty, you were 99-4. That's a pretty incredible record, but I do have to ask, since 99 is just one away from 100, and those 4 losses, were they close losses? Like you easily could have had 100, or were
So
that would have been a cool neat 100 and whatever. That would
So I mean, obviously remember your losses more than your wins, but
Yeah.
they're really of those, there wasn't many close victories. So my first year was where 2 of those losses happened.
Okay.
We lost to Mount Vernon, who had a really good team that year, and we lost to Wilton, which had a good team that year. And then we started winning conference titles my second year, and then we started putting a run together. And then in '94, Wilton beat us, and I think I can't remember if they won state duels that year or got second, but they beat us, and it was pretty close dual meet, but they beat us that year. And then actually both of us had our best teams in '95, which that team went in the Hall of Fame a year ago for West Liberties. But that dual meet was probably one of the coolest high school dual meets that we were ranked 1 all year, they were ranked 2, we're 10 miles apart. It was standing room only. It was like, USA versus the Soviet Union back in the '70s. It was like an icy atmosphere, and that was pretty. Everybody from West Liberty and Wilton still talks about this today. And so I always laugh when my daughter Julia started teaching at Wilton. I said, they'll never hire you there with your last name. I said, you're probably not in very good shape with that. But it was a pretty heated rivalry between us, but with respect.
Yeah.
And then we had Assumption was kind of in our area, and so some of my losses were there. But as far as the conference duels, we lost, and then 1 loss in '97 to Mount Vernon. And then, so those were the 4 losses, 2 to Mount Vernon, 2 to Wilton over those 11 years.
I saw that. I'm like 99, and that's an incredible, like, holy crap record. Then I'm like, I wonder if there was ever if I would have won one of those 4, we'd have an even 100. That would have been, it made that incredible number even more incredible. That was just, that number stood out to me. You won 8 conference titles in those 11 or 12 years, 3 top 5 finishes at state. 94, you guys were 3rd in 2A. 95, you were 4th, and 96, you were 4th. All those were in 2A. You coached 5 state champions. 94 and 96, Nick Marin. Did I say his last name right?
Yes.
112 pounds. How did he maintain 112 pounds for 3 seasons? Usually guys go up in weights as they get older.
So this is kind of interesting. So Nick was actually my JV 103 pounder when he won his first state title. I have another kid who was not a state champion named Brian Bothell, but he went to state 3 times and placed. And they had 1 tryout early in the year, and Brian beat Nick by like 1 or 2 points. And Nick just goes, I'll just go up to 112. And he didn't weigh 112, weighed about 108, 109 pounds. And we were kind of happy just to get him there and win a match or 2. And he caught fire that year, and he walked right through a state title kind of from nowhere. And from that point on, he just went from like a boy to a man. And then the next year they flip-flopped. So Brian went up to 112 and Nick went back down. And then Nick got second that year. And I'm sure he can't do it. It's one of those matches that he got caught early and then he couldn't quite come back from it. And And then as a senior, Nick went back up to 112, and he lost one match that entire season to a guy named Josh Budke, who went to Iowa and was a 3-time 3A champion, close match. And then he really, I don't think he had a match within like 9 points at the state tournament his senior year. He kind of walked through it as a senior.
Nice. And then, yeah, and in between Nick's 2 titles, in 95, Ben Scorpil at 125. And then in 96, you had Chad Morrison win a title at 189. And then in 2000, your last season, Keith Pearl won a state title at 145 pounds. The Scorpil kid, he was one of the 3 inductees to the Hall of Fame with you, the inaugural class. He went second, first, second, and third in his 4 years as a wrestler for you. So you coached 5 of the 10 total state champions in the history of West Liberty wrestling. And those 5 champions were all crowned in a 7-year period. So you guys had pretty amazing run, probably one of the best in the state. Talk about your time at West Liberty and what you're still doing there today.
Well, we're fortunate that we had some hard-nosed kids, and it was really, I think what happened there is I was really fortunate to have coached 7th grade football, and we were able to get our numbers to go from about 18 or 19 kids when I started there to about 40 kids fairly quickly. So it started pretty much with just numbers and some depth. Yeah. And then over the course of time, we were able to get higher quality just over that. And we upgraded our schedule. So we've got to see teams like Don Bosco and stuff like that a lot more. And we always enjoyed that duel. And I think that by year 3, we started getting ranked in state. And I think from there on, all the way till I got done, I think we were ranked in state in the top 10 from that point on in duels. So we had numbers, which, you know, if you have 35, 40 kids out, it's going to really help in the sport of wrestling.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that was really, I guess, really helpful to me. And like I said, having them in football, I would just look for kids that were tryhards, and I would get those kids to try wrestling, and then it was my job to sell it to them after we got them in the door.
Yeah. You gave up the head coaching part in 2000. Can I ask why you gave that up and went to middle school? Were you just ready for a change, or?
Well, I thought about it a couple years before, and I had a really good group of kids that I just really liked in 2000. Matter of fact, I just had a lot of their kids in junior high this last year, and so I wanted to make sure I finished them out. But you know, I was by that time, even though I was young, I'd been a head coach for 16 years, and my first year really was my assistant that took over, Coach DePringer, and I was pretty much in there every night still for the first year or 2, and then I kind of started to fade a little bit. And then what happened is one of the assistants had to resign, and so I ended up helping him as an assistant then for part of when I got done with junior. I was doing junior high, so I did junior high up to Christmas, and then after Christmas I would help out as an assistant. I did that for like 5 or 6 years, and I've still been doing junior high. And then this year for the first time I said I coached girls junior high after Christmas. So
what do you think of this push of Iowa girls wrestling? How's that gone for you guys?
Well, I don't know if you saw the thing in the Penn Doctors of the picture of my group that I had. They did an article on it.
I don't remember if I did or not.
You can get a chance, you can look that up. But so I had 5 girls that wrestled during the boys season.
Yep.
And one of them has sisters that were like all area basketball players. Mm-hmm. And this girl wanted to try wrestling this year. And so she tried and she loved it. Sorry. And I had a couple other girls that were pretty tough in the first half of the year. And they convinced all these other girls to give wrestling a try. And so our AD came to me and how about like a 5-week trial season to see how this goes? Because next year it's going to be brought in by our conference. And so we want to stay ahead of the game, because will you do it? And I said, I like to have a female assistant in there. So I feel comfortable with that. And so we had the PE teacher who was actually Coach DePringer, who succeeded me, his daughter, ended up helping me out. And she was a great recruiter. And we ended up with like 25 girls on our team, and I mean, a lot of their dads were wrestlers, but I had no idea that I was going to walk into such a group of great It was awesome. In all honesty, they can pay attention longer than some of the boys that I have. And I could get like, I'm 45 minutes into like the first day and they're still like paying attention to me like, wow, this is wonderful.
Yep.
And they had a tremendous season. They just went out and kicked butt, all the girls that I had. So it was a lot of fun to have them.
Good. I will say I've coached multiple sports, multiple levels for years. A lot of times the girls are more coachable than the boys. No offense to you boys out there, but sometimes you guys think you know what you're talking about more than you do. And the girls will listen and do it you ask them to do, and then they'll see the benefits there.
I think that's because I had West Liberty has a really good 9th grade class of boy wrestlers coming in. And but some of the things you have to convince them about that they don't know everything. Yeah, because some of them think that they know everything.
That's just in life in general.
And the girls, I think, since they had wrestled and they didn't want to lose, I think they came in like, I can just learn everything I can possibly learn in a short amount of time.
Yep.
So they were all ears, and like I said, I think we had like maybe 6 or 7 of them with no more than 1 loss. They did really, really well, and they were a lot of fun to watch.
Good deal. Yeah, I think girls wrestling in Iowa is a great thing, and I think it's going to be one of the most high number in participation before we know it, sooner than later.
Well, I had a couple of West Liberty's high school girls and that had wrestled junior high, and I wanted to go and watch them in the state tournament last year. Mm-hmm. And we went over there, and luckily I thought, maybe we should go early. My neighbor wanted to go and watch it as well. And we got there like about half an hour, 40 minutes early, and the line from that place in Iowa City, it was going clear down. And I think a lot of the parents maybe miss, if they weren't there at the big front of that line, they missed their daughter's first match because they had to go through and do all the searching, and it was a big process. But the number of people there was sort of shocking.
I heard it was great atmosphere too. Like,
wonderful.
The Girls Association does a very good job of putting on state tournaments just in general. So
it was great to watch.
Good deal. Well, I'm gonna hit our last few sponsors here, then we're gonna kind of wrap this up. Thanks to Dave Hewling for sponsoring today's episode. Also, Darren Carlson of Carlson Drainage. Give Darren a call at 641-860-0500. That's Carlson Drainage. Levi Don Trucking. Thanks to Levi Don and his trucking company for sponsoring so many of these episodes. Call Levi at 641-860-0077 or look him up on Facebook. Miller & Sons Golf Cars, been bringing you great service and quality golf cars for over 50 years. Located just outside of Britt. Contact Skipper Jim at 843-4132 or check them out at millergolfcars.com. And then Triple B's Food Truck, owned by Brett Kozlerich. He was my student teacher a couple years ago, has the best, always fresh, never frozen tenderloins. I work for him on certain days when I'm available. Amazing guy. His dad Rick's an amazing guy. They go all over the Midwest for events. So give Brett a call at 641-895-0885. That's Triple B's Food Trucks. So yeah, overall, your coaching record as a varsity head coach, 239-39. I did want to mention your assistants here because we all know no program is any good without a good staff. Johnny Partita, John Brennan, Adam Roosh, Morgan DePringer, and Rob Minnick. So I always like to be mindful of the fact that it's not just the head coach that wins matches or duels or championships. There's always that staff there.
That's a great group of guys.
Yep. Like I said, most of your success didn't happen at Britt, but you're a product of the Britt system. One of many former Al DeLeon athletes to go into great success coaching. So it's a lot of fun to see. You were one of the people that helped initiate conversations to get the West Hancock Hall of Fame going. Talk a little bit about that and the conversations you had with Steve Lansing and some other people.
Well, Coach Wheeler at West Liberty started a Hall of Fame class, and I thought it was a really cool thing. It was really well received, but I couldn't help but think when I saw that and other schools have Hall of Fames, like with all the great success that West Hancock has had, it'd be wonderful and really, I think, sort of sad that we didn't already have a Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
And so when my mom passed away, for my part of the memorial money, we each sort of gave to a cause that was important to my parents. And my parents loved following West Hancock sports. And so I contacted Kevin Sanger and Mark Sanger. And then we got a hold of Wayne Croneman and Steve Lansing. And they were all very, very receptive. And got a committee. Steve Lansing put together a committee to get push for this, and everybody was really positive. And last year was the inaugural Hall of Fame groups that went in. And it's, I think it was a really wonderful thing that I think West Hancock has a lot to be proud of about that.
Yep, I'm on the committee as well. And one thing we talked about is how many people do we induct each year? We started with 5, we bumped it up to 7 this year. And the conversation was, at the way we're going, with the success we're still having and all the success we've had in the past, I'm like, I don't think we'll ever run out of nominees. We have, I mean, I have a document going for potential inductees, and it, like, I could spend hour after hour after hour on it, putting stuff together, and it's just wrestling alone. Like, you have a West Liberty Wrestling Hall of Fame. We could have a separate branch for the Britt West Hancock Wrestling, but there's just so many deserving people.
You know, you could have a lot of very good all-around athletes, and it may take them 50 years to get into the Hall of Fame in this school. So, I mean, it's a wonderful problem to have, first world problems.
So I said, let's go to 7 because we can get some people in quicker. And like, we could probably do 10, but the board at the school doesn't fit 10. But it's just crazy. People are pretty excited about it. I've been sending stuff to newspapers and other things and get stuff posted online. And our inductees this year, we have Denny Brum, Jim Timmerman, Herschel Morris, Dick Govic, who will be coming all the way up from Arizona for the event, the 1986 girls Brit golf team, the 1948 Kanawha baseball team, and I feel like I'm forgetting one more off the top of my head. Can't remember how many I listed there. There's 7. Said Herschel Morris. He has a record for over 90 years. If I forgot somebody, I'm sorry. I just was working on it the other day, but on the spot, it's kind of hard to remember. But I'm real excited for this year's West Hancock Hall of Fame. That's August 25th. The inductees will be honored at, Hejlik Newbrow. There we go, Hejlik Newbrow. The inductees will be honored at halftime of the Garner game. And then after the game, everyone will head out to the golf course. They were so good to us last year for hosting. And there'll be a meal for about the first 175 people we've planned for, and be a good time celebrating those people and those teams. So how close, as we wrap up, you're wearing your West Hancock 2019 state championship shirt. How close do you still follow West Hancock athletics?
I'm pretty bad that I tend to watch most of their games on the podcast or the live stream. And so I don't miss many of them. And actually, in cold winter nights, I tend to watch a lot of the wrestling as well.
Yeah.
So I follow fairly close.
Yeah, and that live stream's the best. KOW does such a good job. And for football, you have Kevin Wilson and Jay Hiscox, and then Ted Smith does a lot of the wrestling. And
well, you know, for all of us that live a ways away, that it's a wonderful way to follow them.
Yep.
And I have to real quickly, it's so funny because that podcast is going on, and 2 years in a row I've been at a junior high when the Britt won their last 2, or West Hancock won their last 2 titles. I was at a junior high wrestling meet, and I had a couple assistants, and it was getting to be crunch time in those games. And I said, I'm sorry. I said, you're going to have to just take the chair for one match, but I got to see the end of this. I said, I can't take this. I'm going to have a heart attack over here.
Yep.
So
well, 2019 team, Coach Bob Sanger's last game, I so wanted them to win for him. And the game was during the day, and I could not be out of school that day because I had already used my personal days for my sister's wedding. And I told my students the day before, if they get all of today's and tomorrow's work done soon, like today, tomorrow we're just watching the game, because these kids turned into West Hancock fans for me down there. And I told them Coach Sanger's story with him being sick and stuff. And I'd have kids come to me Monday morning, go, I see they won by whatever score, and I watched the live stream. And those kids were scared of me during that game. I was pacing back and forth and slamming my fists on the table and just making all sorts of weird noises. I just so badly want them to win that game. So
there was a nerve wracking, and it was like such a relief when they won. It was like this big weight.
Yep. And that live stream, like I said, is great for people that don't live in the area, that or maybe can't get out of the house due to health or age or whatever. It's such a good thing. So so we're going to wrap this up here. Tomorrow morning from Lois and Al DeLeon's house, I'll be recording a podcast with Larry Hochhaus. Larry was a 2-time state champion wrestler back in 1959 and 1960. And then after that will be the 2015 boys basketball team that broke the 85-year streak going to state basketball. Nick Schmidt, one of my podcast sponsors. And then I have a great runner from when I was in school, Lori Tlach. I don't remember what her current last name is, but she's a Tlach. And then Amber Hejlik, who's now Amber Evans. Her and I went to school together. She was a great standout athlete all the way around. So Curt, as we wrap this up from the Britt Public Library, who, by the way, I love this facility. It's such a nice library for a small
Great.
town. They've been so hospitable to me for doing a few podcasts. Any last minute things we forgot to say or any shout outs you want to throw out there, people?
You know, really about the only thing is I just feel really blessed to have grown up in Britt. I think that I had fantastic coaches. We had so many neighborhood friends. You know, I grew up with people like Willicks and Pritchards and Horstmans and Millers, and it was just kind of an ideal way to grow up. And so I feel really lucky as a person to be able to grow up here.
You bet. Same here. I always say Brit people love to tell non-Brit people about Brit. That's one thing we love to do. So I always end this with Go Eagles, but it's Hobo Days. So we have to also say happy Hobo Days, everybody. Thanks for watching.